I'm going to run through this really quickly. I'm an ethicist, so I think about the application of ethics to technology a lot of the time. And I'm going to just broach the subject because it's such a big one. This gives you a kind of menu of what I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be giving you a kind of snapshot overall. That's what I'm going to begin with, of what the ethical issues are. Then I'm going to run through a couple of particular technologies, and not for very long. I may not even get through all of them, just to give you a sense of what I think the issues are. And I hope to get to something about smart cities at the end, because I think that's an area that we haven't probably seen the risks of so far today. One of the things that I'm interested in is not just this problem of anonymization that was mentioned this morning, and the fact that anonymization can't be guaranteed, but I'm interested in just the tension between the offer to personalize data and to try to get a picture that is serviceable to a single consumer. There's a tension between that and any kind of privacy protection. Obviously, if material is personalized, if data is personalized, something about that person whose data it is will be inferable from the data. You'll be able to infer it from the data. So the whole practice of offering personalized data collection and personalized services based on data collection is one of the things that I'm interested in. I'm interested too in the way that the use of the Internet of Things and the very fine-tuning of the satisfaction of one's preferences might seem to personalize and make your way of using things unique, but in fact, overall, it probably homogenizes people's activity more than it should be. So let me just give you some illustrations. This is a story from the Daily Telegraph about the new generation BBC iPlayer. This is an iPlayer that's being developed in connection with Microsoft. And what it does, in a television, it monitors the numbers of voices that exist in the room as a television program is being watched, and it takes note of whether they're adult or child's voices, and it probably alters the offer of television programs on the basis of that. Over time, of course, it will be able to infer the patterns of family life for the purpose of fine-tuning your television experience. And folks, what I'm claiming is that's too trivial a purpose to justify the privacy violation. There's no reason why people need to know how many children are in my house or when they go to bed just to fine-tune my television preferences. That just seems really in need of justification, if you're with me. Let's go on to autonomous cars. There are many issues that are raised by autonomous cars. Let me start with just one. If you think about a car, it's an extension of a domestic space because the family travels in a car, you travel in a car. I remember when I drove every day, I looked at it as an area that I was sovereign over. I chose the music I listened to. I got pissed off in my car, and so on. It's an extension of this domestic space. And again, because some kinds of data collection that could be performed in autonomous cars take data from this domestic space, it needs a justification. And some of the justifications simply for fine-tuning relatively unimportant preferences raise the same issues as in the case of the television. Of course, there are further issues, and some of these bring one to the benefits of IoT and the benefits of automated cars. A lot of automated cars will turn out to be shared. There'll be a version of public transport instead of private transport. That's all good. It reduces the amount of traffic. It reduces traffic speeds. So it probably saves people's lives. All that's good. But there are these other issues that come up. I know from studying a particular case of a pod maker who's working with the local authority in Milton Keynes, that in order to come up with a business model for using these pods within a retail area of Milton Keynes, it's going to be possible to send messages to the pod so that public transport passengers can hear pitches for their custom. And the route of the pod can be changed according as people accept the pitches of the retailers in Milton Keynes. You see what I mean? So you could have real-time route changing as people in the pod accept offers from retailers to go to their place as opposed to other places they might have gone. And here again, even though the space of the public transport pod is not a private space, there is a question about whether that space is getting over-commercialized when these pitches are made in real time. It's not like having the advertisements in the tube, you know? It's actually a pitch to change your plans for the sake of a retail purchase. And then what happens if people have different plans within the pod? How are people going to decide where the pod goes? You see what I mean? There are other issues that we're not talking about here. We're not talking about the way that automated cars make the profession of driver or the occupation of driver obsolescent. We're not talking about how in Europe automated cars and automated lorries will work. We have these ancient cities with these tiny streets. We don't want automated cars necessarily. It may not be viable for automated cars to go in there. Maybe lorries will have to decant their loads onto very small pods that are going to compete with us for pedestrian space. There are lots of issues that haven't been worked out in the use of pods in Europe, especially, it seems to me. Let me go on to healthcare technology. This is an area I've worked in a lot. There are two kinds of technologies that I'm interested in talking about here. One is the kind of lifestyle health monitoring type of technology that's already been mentioned earlier in earlier talks. You may have heard, I have a slide from LinkedIn where Telefonica is soliciting somebody to join their team to work on the Wingman project. The Wingman project is a kind of predictive health and lifestyle prompting type of technology. Here again, though of course healthcare monitoring has tremendous advantages in principle, there's an issue about whether this kind of life logging, health monitoring practice that people are going in for is net beneficial or not, or whether the main beneficiaries of it might be companies like Telefonica that would be able to assess different healthcare needs and commercial possibilities from what they're learning. In the case of care robotics, here's an example of the kind of care robot that works in a smart home. You have not only further problems of privacy violation, but you also have the difficulty that by substituting care robots for people, the elderly population, which we've heard is burgeoning, will become even more isolated from other people than they are now because of having care robots occupy their homes and learn about their techniques and being their companions as opposed to human beings. There are further privacy violation problems for care robots because they have to communicate information in the case of an emergency to the authorities, and they also communicate with the carers of people who are being companioned by these care robots. So there are conflicts about who that data of the elderly person might be sent to. Moving to a slightly different product, which maybe people here will have heard of. This is a big belly trash receptacle. Have you heard of these? These are smart rubbish receptacles, and they serve the excellent purpose of making rubbish collection more efficient because they say to a central hub when they're full and when they need to be emptied. That's good. But in certain cities, and Dublin is one of these are Wi-Fi hubs these big belly things are Wi-Fi hubs. They collect mobile phone handshakes as you go along. So there's quite a lot of de facto location monitoring, de facto mobile phone monitoring, and nobody is told about this. There isn't a sign saying that this is happening, and even if there were a sign, how would you be able to assess as you're walking by and are a captive audience for this stuff that it's a good idea to be near it or not? You wouldn't even know what range it operated in. So it's the dual use of this otherwise excellent object that I'm worrying about. And just to move to my last topic really quickly, if we look at arrays of sensors that are used in so-called smart cities, and I here use the example of Chicago, they call it the array of things. This is the kind of thing that the guy from Essex this morning was alluding to, where you have loads of sensors put on light poles and so on, collecting temperature, pollution, density of pedestrian traffic, density of automobile traffic, for the purpose maybe of, rejigging the sequencing of traffic lights and things of that kind. But of course, the data that's collected here, if aggregated in particular ways, is potentially very damaging to people who live in high pollution areas or high pedestrian density areas or high other kinds of areas. In particular, there's dangers that certain kinds of profiling of neighborhoods could lead to very high insurance charges, larger than usual house insurance premiums, and things of that kind. I don't think this is in the least science fiction. Add to that what happens in Chicago, where you have predictive policing in operation and a lot of data being collected for the purpose of profiling places that might be dangerous, and you have a slightly unsettling type of situation where people might be living in neighborhoods that are considered very high crime neighborhoods that might also have insurance implications, and it might also lead to the difficulty of selling one's own house if data is used for saying that certain areas of the city are dangerous. So I think that the Internet of Things combined with big data collection and the way that that data can be aggregated and used in profiles commercially in the areas that I've mentioned, those pose serious issues for ethical reflection. Thanks.